Terve, Nemenion Karen Reilly, Tiaus Kentlen Tor Project, Andexi, and Boho Sumea. So the rest is in English. So I'm going to be talking about security from the nonprofit perspective. So Tor is a nonprofit that harnesses military technology to provide privacy, anonymity, and censorship circumvention. We do this in three main activities. One, we produce open source, free technology that gives people control over their own information. So the digital trails that we all leave behind that many people aren't aware of, by default, we shut that down by separating the origin and the destination of your communications so that your internet service providers don't know what you're doing online, and the sites that you visit don't know who you are unless you tell them, because many people aren't aware, but IP addresses give up your physical location, which can be problematic for many reasons. So, how many of you have heard of Tor before Snowden? Oh, good. How many of you use Tor? Okay, good. Great audience. So some of this is review. So the Tor project is a US-based nonprofit organization, and we're here to promote freedom of expression. So, as I mentioned, tool development. We also do scientific research into anonymity-preserving technologies and things that are threats to anonymity. We also do education about privacy rights and anonymity, because no matter how strong your tool is, if your end users don't use it correctly, then they're not secure. Also, we do outreach to businesses and policymakers to speak for people who need anonymity online when they can't themselves go to a conference and defend anonymity from attacks on it from government. So Tor is a volunteer network of 5,200 people who give their bandwidth in about 90 countries. The network also has a command line tool, ARM, anonymity relay monitoring, where people who donate their bandwidth can see how their relay is performing. We also have a project, Tor Router, which puts the ability to be a relay and also to proxy your own connection into a router. So the software, our primary software, is the Tor browser bundle, which packages the little t Tor, the network interface, into an easy-to-use package. And it's bundled with Firefox, a version where we try to be as secure by default. So it does a couple of things. It sends all of your traffic through Tor, and we disable some plugins like Flash that can leak information. And we also package it with a tool that we worked on with the Electronic Frontier Foundation called HTTPS Everywhere, which, where available, forces your connection to be encrypted. We also work with the Amnesiac Incognito Live system, which is a Linux distribution that you can use as a live CD. It runs everything through Tor and has some encryption programs if you don't trust your hardware, if you need to go to an internet cafe or a library. Tails is pretty good. We also have a version of Tor developed by the Guardian project that works on Android. Our research is into metrics. So we don't gather information about our users. What we know is volunteered. We don't log information about our users. We know roughly which country they're coming from. And we know this because we had a National Science Foundation grant on measuring anonymous networks without violating the privacy of their users. We do a lot of research into anonymity. If you are interested in anonymous networks, you can go to the anonymity bibliography, which is maintained by our founder, Roger Dingledine, which has papers from 1976 to the present day on anonymous networks. We also have the Open Observatory of Network Interference, which seeks to measure not only what is censored, but how it is censored. We're also a pretty big community. We have ties to academic research and private research organizations. We can be reached by mail. We're on IRC. We have QA projects. We have a support desk that actually grew out of, we did interviews on Voice of America Persian News Network, where we put our tor-assistance@torproject.org address, which is how you can connect to our researchers. And it got flooded with Farsi language support requests. And so we got some volunteers to start answering questions, because we went from maybe one question in Persian a month to 100 to 200 a day. So now we have a support desk. We have discussion lists, both for relay operators, for volunteer developers, and for researchers. And we have a forum. We spun up a Stack Exchange, and you can also find us on Reddit. So we go against traffic analysis. On a regular connection, your ISP can see where you're going online. And as I mentioned before, the sites that you visit can see where you're coming from. This can be a problem if you live in an authoritarian regime where everything you do is monitored, and if you engage in political speech or try to connect to something that the regime doesn't agree with, you'll either be chastised or the information will be blocked. Some of this information is stuff that we take for granted, like reproductive health. So if you have a condition, a risky pregnancy in some countries, you don't have access to information about steps that you can take to make yourself safer. So one of the solutions is to put another hop between you and the website. So a VPN can be pretty good. Sometimes they're faster than Tor. But the problem is now your ISP can only see a connection to the VPN, and the sites only see a connection from the VPN, but you've just moved over the potential for surveillance and network interference to another server. That's a single point of failure. Even if you do trust the people running the VPN, they can be hacked, they can be subpoenaed, or they can be threatened to give up your information. So let's add a couple of hops to this equation. That's Tor. So Tor bounces your traffic through 3 out of those 5,200 relays. And the way you connect to it is born out of our view of network security. We embrace worst case scenarios because of the people who use Tor. So you download Tor, and you can also check the cryptographic signature of the bundle to make sure it came from us and not somebody who's doing a man-in-the-middle attack. You'd get a map of the network. Each relay signs in to 8 directory authorities that create a map of the network. They then have to reach consensus. So if you were to hack into one directory authority, spin up a bunch of nodes, and tell Tor clients to connect to your friends, thus breaking the anonymity, that would be detected. You wouldn't connect to that. So you've replaced someone being able to track what you do. Your ISP only sees the connection into the Tor network, if that, and the sites only see a connection out of the Tor network. So again, it began in the military, but if you have a Navy anonymity network, and part of your threat is you don't want people knowing that the Navy is investigating you, then that's not much use. Anonymity loves company. So we have the majority of users are actually ordinary citizens. They just think surveillance is creepy. They don't like when they search for side effects of a new medication. They don't like seeing ads for medical conditions. Even if you're not worried about your health insurance, if you have cancer and you're looking up information on chemotherapy drugs, maybe you don't want to see ads for chemo caps or hospice care every time you're looking at other things online. Law enforcement uses Tor, both to blend into the crowd so that people don't know they're being investigated, but also to protect themselves and their families, because some criminals do go after law enforcement. If your name's out there and your family's on social networks, that can be pretty risky. Journalists use Tor to protect themselves and their sources. If you're a journalist, you have one of the most risky jobs on the planet, because whether you are investigating corruption in football in Brazil, or you're in a war zone and you're talking to activists, or even doing an investigative report on food safety in the United States between criminals, authoritarian regimes, and companies that do surveillance on people, there's a real risk of your investigation being derailed or actually being killed. The military still uses Tor. They don't tell us what they use it for, but we appreciate their support when it comes to research. Activists use Tor to connect to their social networks without being detected. Now, that education component comes in here because some people do activism, but they use their real names instead of pseudonyms on social networks, and there are people in jail because of that. Survivors of trauma use Tor because even though survivors of trauma should not be stigmatized, there is still a need for privacy to bring people to their comfort zone. They want to talk to other survivors of what they've gone through, but whether they're a private citizen or somebody with a public profile, they don't want that revealed to the world, unless they choose to. Businesses use Tor. So if you are poking at a competitor's network, you probably don't want them to be adding attention or maybe putting developers on something that you're going to be competing with. If you're going up against malware, other exploits, maybe you don't want a criminal network to know that you're watching them. So Tor is really useful for that. And if you are getting goods and services, whether you're a private citizen or you work at a company that does a lot of procurement, your prices change depending on where you are geographically, or if somebody recognizes that you are a customer who tends to buy a lot of things, a lot of e-commerce sites change the prices. So, if I only make one point today, it's that diversity is security. A lot of the mistakes that have cost people customers and caused really bad PR are born out of having development teams that don't think of different types of customers. You don't want to be the next Google buzz. Don't wait until somebody with a stalker is contacted by that person that they thought they shut out of their life because you've changed your privacy policies or you have a new application that's leaking their contact list. Again, think in worst case scenarios, both for your staff and for your customer. So think, do I have journalists as customers? How am I securing their data against both private and government and criminal, also criminal networks? What happens if one of your staff members goes home to visit his family and they worked on an application that they thought was innocuous, an image sharing site, but the regime notices that a pornographer has used it and now they're in jail? How do you protect their identities? Just think of these things. Changes in status. So some of your customers may sign up for your products when there are no threats to their physical security or their reputation, but sometimes that changes. What can you offer them in terms of locking down their profiles and protecting their information when they acquire a stalker or somebody who has some sort of vendetta against them? So our design ethos is, again, born out of worst case scenarios. So we're open source. This is for two reasons. One, we can enlist the help of our friends to make sure we are as secure as we possibly can be. Also, you don't have to trust us. Because we take US government funding, a lot of people are disturbed by that, and rightly so these days. So Tor does exactly what it says on the tin, because we put the ingredient list out there, and you can verify our claims. Don't trust us, trust the code. We make it as secure by default as possible, which unfortunately a lot of people are upset with because we block Flash, and a lot of plugins. So as far as they're concerned, we break the internet. But if you go in and enable those plugins, you're making a conscious choice to use something that you should maybe got a warning out of. Our staff can say, Flash is insecure, here's how to enable it, but please don't, in many, many languages. Because even if you're an activist under threat, when YouTube doesn't work, people aren't happy. But again, it's informed consent. No logs, we can't leak what we don't gather in the first place. So for a business perspective, ask yourself, do I really need this information? Do I really need this personal information? Don't gather it because you might need it one day. We distribute trust among a network and among the code because of researchers that are constantly looking for vulnerabilities. We encourage this, and it's a good deal for an academic researcher. We like having people point out problems. We like it even better if they come with a solution in hand. And so you get more exposure, we'll blog about it. It's encrypted. At each hop in that network, there is a session key. And so we don't touch your traffic, we don't see your traffic, and that circuit changes every 10 minutes, so that crypto is only in play for a limited amount of time, so it's really hard to break. There's additional security available. As I mentioned, you can use GPG and check that one of our developers signed that with their public key. And we also have implemented deterministic builds. Again, distributed trust. So somebody can take our source code, build something out of it. It should match bit for bit so that we can see whether somebody has interfered with it. We're very open about what our tool does and does not do. Again, this is something for business that your tool should say what it does and does not do right on the box. You may have customers who decide to put themselves at risk. We deal with activists, and they are going into very dangerous places with tear gas and bullets and things. But even though they're willing to sacrifice themselves in some cases, that should not happen because we failed to give them information. We shouldn't give people a false sense of security. So we have a warning page that tells people exactly what Tor does and does not do. And we reinforce this with blog posts. So at that last hop out of the Tor network, you're on the clear open web. So we have a blog post, plain text over Tor is still plain text. So you still need to encrypt your information if you want it to be really secure. So when it comes to exploits, again, enlist help. If you want a lead on some postdocs at a university who'd really like to take a look at your products, then we'd be happy to make some introductions. What we do, despite the fact that our competitors often point to our blog posts and say, look, Tor doesn't work as well as our one-hop VPN with very little encryption, because they say, look, it's broken. They admitted it. Again, to maintain the informed consent of our users, we find the vulnerability, we fix it, we disclose, and we educate people on this. So even when it isn't something that is within the control of Tor, we still do education on it. One case in point, which you may have heard of, we offer hidden services. You can host a website within the Tor network. Your traffic never leaves Tor. You use a standard server software, but it interacts with users via the Tor network. Now it's 6 hops because there's a rendezvous point in that network. And so you don't find out where your audience is coming from, and they don't find the location of the server. That being said, if you're using server software that is vulnerable to exploits, those exploits can still be done over the Tor network. So you still need to secure your server software against all sorts of vulnerabilities. So I'll close with this. My role at Tor is to educate journalists. Again, they're very high risk. And so there's a challenge in giving people complete information about their risk online, but making it easy to understand. And also not discouraging people. I mean, some of my colleagues call our method shock and hug, because before the Snowden revelations, people didn't believe that the internet was a surveillance system by default, the way most people use it. They thought they were pretty much anonymous, even in places where journalists and activists go to jail. Also, I realized that I needed to change my tack when Iranian activists, after one of the trainings, said, "God, lighten up." I mean, these are people who've been in prison for their activities, and they said, "You are bumming us out. You are making us sad. Can you offer any sort of optimism?" And so, hence the hug part, that even if you just make yourself more of a pain in the neck to your adversary, you've done something. And this is something with your companies. Make the people selling exploits go to the next company. You know, the ones that don't hash their PII, that don't monitor their outgoing or really their incoming traffic, the ones that don't firewall their web server from their customer data, not to mention any names, Target. So make yourself a less attractive target. So this is what I'm telling journalists about your systems. What does the network know about you by default? So a mobile device, for instance, knows where you are physically. This is something that a lot of customers are not aware of unless it's pointed out to them. Does your website know where you are physically in the world because of an IP address? By the way, what's an IP address? You have to explain that first. What are you likely telling it? So apart from what they know by default, what are you offering up? Did you read the end user license agreement that says that they're tracking what you're doing from site to site? What did you give them when you signed up for a service? What are you posting? When you post an image, do you realize that your location data is in that as well? Even if you told Facebook that you live somewhere else, you just posted a picture with the GPS coordinates and the EXIF data. How's this information stored? Is it encrypted? And who has access to it? Who within the company has access to it? Is that access recorded or not? So if one of your employees is stalking one of your customers, do you know? These are things that have happened, and it's happened in government. The LoveInt story was one of the things that really disturbed people. How is it used? Is it being sold to data brokers? So there was a case in which a man in the States whose daughter had died in a traffic accident got a letter from Office Max that says, "Daughter died in car crash." So why did that happen? Who authorized that? Don't be that company. If you don't need it, please don't gather it. A lot of people will give up information to you in order to get better tailored products and services. Just ask them. What tools and behavior can help? So sometimes Tor will be something that you should use. In the case of mobile security, behavior can be something that can be really useful. Since it's a tracking device by default, and maybe your adversary knows where you are at any given time, they're doing physical surveillance or they're just tracking your phone until they see something out of the ordinary. So maybe send your phone on a walk with a friend to the places that you usually go. Again, that's not technical, that's behavioral. And are there any alternatives to what you're planning to do? Should you pass a note instead of sending an email? What does encryption do and not do? Does it get you more attention, which is after you've actually managed to encrypt an email is really disheartening, because if it just attracts more attention, then maybe you shouldn't use it. On the other hand, it might protect somebody else in your network if you're mentioning them by name. And that is it. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you, Karen, for your interesting presentation. First of all. And like during the previous keynotes, we have the microphones here in the aisles. If you have any questions, you know this is typical in Finland. Yeah. People run to queue to the microphones to have questions.
Please. I want to know if I didn't cover something that you wanted to know.
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting for the people to queue, so I have a question. You mentioned the country Iran a couple of times in your, let's say, presentation, but do you have any estimate or real data that, like, where, let's say, a majority or a big part of the Tor users are located geographically?
So if you go to metrics.torproject.org, we do collect some data without revealing individual identifying information. So the vast majority are in the United States.
Okay.
Germany is usually a close second. So most of our users are in places where the law claims to protect privacy, but in practice, maybe not so much. And then our second, it used to be the United States and Germany. Then we did more outreach, and then it was the United States and Iran, then Germany. And then now the various governments, China and Iran, again, we go where we're needed, so we don't have any political agenda. You know, if you are censored, we care about you. So they blocked, they got the public list of Tor relays, and then they blocked them.
Okay.
So we rolled out bridges, which are just that first hop into Tor, but we don't publish them. You get them a few at a time, you know, via email, via Twitter. Your friends can set them up privately. And so we did that for a while. And then Iran started identifying us on the wire. So we looked like an HTTPS connection to a bank.
Yeah.
Except that usually behavior is you log on, you send a big blob of data, you get a big blob of data, and then you log off. You don't keep on sending information. And also our certificate had an expiration date that wasn't in line with a bank. So they had identified us on the wire, so we changed the way that looked, and that worked for a while.
Okay.
And then on Valentine's Day 2012, they sent us another gift in blocking TLS connections. So we rolled out something called OBS proxy, which is pronounced differently depending on which Tor engineer you talk to, or pluggable transports, which mimic other types of traffic. For two reasons. You can't tell that somebody's using Tor if it's implemented correctly. And then there are people working on projects like Skype Morph, which will make Tor traffic look like Skype. So if somebody wants to block Tor, they also have to block things like Skype, which makes the cost, both in terms of developer hours and politics, much higher in blocking Tor. Now, the problem with metrics is that we don't have an accurate way to measure bridge users. So on the graph, Iran is flat. There's nobody connecting directly anymore.
Okay.
So we think that we have roughly the same levels, but there's no way to tell yet. So.
All right, interesting. Any questions from the audience? All right, well, let's continue with the discussion. Well, you might know, or you might have a perception. 2 years ago in the Arabic Spring that we had in North Africa. So, do you know, or do you think that did Tor play a significant role there?
So, we don't want to take credit for activists. I mean, every once in a while, people will write a story and say, oh, Tor's a hero. We're not heroes, we're tech support for the heroes. So I don't want to exaggerate the role of the internet in that. I mean, there were people fighting and dying in the streets to make that happen. We do as much as we can to support those networks. So what Tor does is if you're organizing a protest, and you're using Tor and maybe doing chat over a hidden service, then at least you're not tipping off the regime that you're organizing something, so that they don't round you up before you have a chance to go out into the streets and get on the news. So we don't want to give people a false sense of security. I mean, there's still risk involved. So we played a very small part. I think this is one of the times when humility is called for. But yes, we provided security for activists, and also the education component. There are people, when Facebook was blocked, they used circumvention technology. And then various governments either don't block, like Egypt, they weren't doing censorship, they were doing surveillance, and people got arrested. Or Syria lifted the blocks in order to do surveillance on people. So if we do nothing else, just having people question the information that's out there about them is something that's really valuable. If a block is lifted, be suspicious. So I'm really proud of that. But we can't take all the credit as well. There are other hackerspaces and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Committee to Protect Journalists, I mean, the Knight Foundation. There's so many people who had a role in that, that credit really must be given to the internet freedom community a little bit, and then for the activists.
Okay. Okay, we have a question from the audience.
Hi, Karen. This is Tapiranta from TeliaSonera. So there's always going to be people that want to abuse technology like Tor for criminal purposes. So are you somehow cooperating with authorities or governments to catch the criminals or people who are abusing the technology?
So we have a relationship with law enforcement. Usually it starts when there is an investigation and some jerk is using Tor, and law enforcement comes up against Tor and doesn't find the back door. They email us and ask for the back door, and we tell them, no, a back door is a vulnerability in an otherwise secure system, and you can't really control who has access to an exploit. Even if you don't produce a back door, there's enough vulnerabilities in any network. Why introduce more? And again, we're open source, so if we did introduce one, somebody would find it and embarrass us, and then that would be the end of us. What we do is we educate law enforcement on the good uses of Tor, including their use of Tor. So if there's criminal activity going on in the Tor network, the good thing is that law enforcement has access to it because they can use Tor. So we educate them, we don't give them backdoors, but we also talk to law enforcement and tell them that Tor can be used not only by their agents, but also concerned citizens. You can set up a truly anonymous tip line. And when you work at Tor, you read a lot of depressing reports about how crime happens, who's enabling it, and corruption, even though it's not as much of a concern in Finland, is a major driver of crimes against vulnerable people. And some governments are not very interested in having their failings to protect vulnerable people exposed. Again, the journalists. They'll go after the journalists for exposing the fact that they're not going after the criminals. So when we enable activists to secure their communications when they're trying to protect vulnerable people, to report on drug cartels that are driving violence in their community, then for the most part we can work together with law enforcement and tell them that look, I'm angry about criminal activity on Tor. This is not what we created it for, but we're not going to endanger the security of good people working to make the world a better place, and the people who are working with law enforcement. That is a line that we absolutely will not cross. More question?
Hi, Karen. This is more like a human interest or nerd interest, if you will. You have your browser build bundles for many platforms, including Android on mobile devices, but there don't seem to be any on iOS. Is there a reason?
So there is a client for iOS. It's made by Mike Tygus, who is actually a Knight Foundation fellow. And the problem with it is that it hasn't been audited. So this is one of those things that we would like to have, we have a track page, and we have a ticket for it. So if there are any iOS developers out in the audience, anybody who does development on Objective-C, please look at the ticket, email me, I will email it to you, and we would love help with it. The other problem with mobile devices is it's one of the least secure endpoints. So even though there's demand for it, I can't in good conscience tell somebody who's really under threat of surveillance to use a mobile device. I mean, that being said, the Guardian project does a lot of great work. They have things like Informacam that enables people to document human rights abuses and upload it via mobile past national firewalls. And they have Obscuracam, where you can take pictures and obscure the faces of people in them. So you could say, take a picture of the scale of a protest without identifying individuals and leaving them exposed to retaliation by the government. But any platform that there's a demand for, we'd like to put Tor on it. But that being said, we're a fairly small project. So if there are any people who really want to see iOS on Tor and Tor going together, and they happen to have money for development or volunteer time, please email me. We'd love to see that happen.
All right. Thank you for your nice presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Reilly.
Thank you.